Welcome. In this video, I will show you how to create this split landing page using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. First, let's create the files, one for the HTML, one for the CSS, and another for JavaScript. Then, let's link the CSS and the JS files to the HTML file. To do that, let's create the structure of the HTML. We will create a title element and write in it split landing. We will also create a link element in the head and add the path of the CSS file. In the body, we will create a script element with the path of the JS file. Now, let's look at the page. It has two parts, left and right. Each part has two contents, one that appears before clicking on it, and another that appears after clicking on it. So, let's create a div with a class split landing that will be the container. Inside it, let's create two more div elements for left and right, and give them the classes left and right. Inside each one of them, let's create a div for the outer content, and another div for the inner content. The outer content contains an image element and an H3 element. The inner content contains an H3 element for the title, which moves from the outer content under the image to the top of the inner content when we open it. Then, it also contains a paragraph element for the description, a UL element with LI elements for the specifications, another paragraph element for the price, and a button element for buying. I also add the images and the names. Now, let's work on the styles. If you think of how to make the page split, the first thing that comes to your mind is to use display flex. But I will use display grid instead, because it gives me more control over the width of the left and right sides. If you use display flex and give 50% width to each side, you will have to change both sides' width in the JS file every time you make a change in the page. So you will have to select the left and change the width, and then select the right and change the width in two lines. But with display grid, we will use one property called grid template columns in the parent element to change both sides at once. It will be much cleaner. Also, what do you think about how this hover effect can be made? You may say I will use CSS. I will select the left element with hover selector and change the width. Then I will select the left element with hover again, and then select the right element and change its width. It is correct and it will work, but what about hovering over the right side? You can change the width of right, but you cannot change the width of left when hovering over right, because you cannot select an element that comes before the selected one. Of course, you cannot do this with grid also. So, the only way is to use JavaScript. Now, let's work on the styles in CSS file. Let's add global styles for all elements. I will make the margin 0 because I don't want margin for the body, and I want to add margin for other elements by myself. I will also add box sizing border box. It makes the element padding and border sizes included in its width and height. This property has a useful effect when you want to make space between content and page sides. You will add padding, and then padding will take its size from width and height of element instead of increasing its size. Now let's select container element using its class split landing. Let's give it full width and height using VW and VH units. VW stands for viewport width and VH stands for viewport height. As their names suggest, 100 VW is equal to width of page, and 100 VH is equal to height of page. If you change width or height of window, element size will also change accordingly. Let's also add display grid property. To create columns and give them widths, we will use grid template columns property. We want two columns, each one having half width apparent, so we will write 50% or auto twice. Now let's open HTML file to see how it looks. You can open file directly, but any changes you make to code, you will need to refresh page to apply them. Also, the CSS, JS, and any image files will not be found as we add / before each one of them. So, if you use this way, remember to remove the / in all of them. Alternatively, you can install an extension called Live Server. It will run the HTML file on your local host, and any change you make will reload the page automatically. So, after installing it, right-click on the HTML file and click on Open with Live Server. Then, the extension will start working and the file will open in the browser. The images that I use are too big, so let's make them smaller by giving them width 70% from their parent, which is the left or the right element. Also, the inner element should not be shown here, so let's give it display none. The left and right elements are distributed between two columns by default, but let's do it manually. So, select Split Landing Left and use grid column 1/2. These numbers are the numbers of grid lines. They are the lines at the start, between, and end of each column, as you can see. So, the left element will take from the line 1 to 2, which is the first column, and the right element will take from the line 2 to line 3, which is the second column. Also, let's center the content by selecting the left and right elements together and giving each of them display flex and align item center to center them vertically. But for centering horizontally, justify content will not work as the image and title are inside a div that takes the full width of the parent element. So, the best way for me is to use text align center. Now let's add some colors. For left, add background color dark cyan, and for right, add background color Dodger blue. Then give split landing the color white to make the text white. Also, let's change font family to sans serif. Add also margin bottom in the image to separate between it and the text. Now let's move to JS file. First, define the elements. Right const, split content, equals, document, query selector, split content, and also for left and right sides. Now let's make the hover effect by using on mouse enter event. So right left, dot, on mouse enter, equals, anonymous function, and inside it write split content dot style, dot grid template columns. You can write it with camel case or write it as it is in CSS inside bracket notation instead of dot. And change its value to be 75% 25%. Do the same with right side but reverse the width. Now it works. Also, let's add transition to make it more animated. Go to CSS file and select split content element and add transition property. If we make it 0.7s, it will be too fast, but if we use 1.5 second, it will be much better but still fast. So instead of changing the duration, we can change the way that it animates by adding another value that is linear. This will make all animation in same speed. Now it is too slow, so go back to 0.7s. Now it is good. Let's add the back button. Go to HTML file and add two buttons, one in each side. In fact, they are not button elements. They will be div elements with class back. Inside them, there will be a span for the arrow and the word back. For right it will be greater than, and for left it will be less than. Go back to CSS file and select both back elements. Give them position absolute so they don't take space in parent element and top 20 pixels to move them to top a page. Then select each back separately and give left side left 20 pixels and right side right 20 pixels. Now their position is good. Let's add some color to arrow. Select back arrow and add font size 20 pixels to make it bigger, padding 2 pixels, background color firebrick, and border radius 50% to make it circular. The width needs to be increased. Increase it to 7 pixels. Now it is good. Make mouse cursor be pointer when hovering over it by adding cursor pointer. Add hover effect by selecting back with hover and arrow, then changing background color to white and color to firebrick. Now it looks good. Also add transition property. Now let's make them disappear by adding opacity 0 instead of display none, as it does not affect view of other elements. Also, when changing opacity with transition, it gives fade effect. I don't do that for inner content as it takes space in its parent element. Now let's make the click functionality. Right left, dot, on click, equals, anonymous function, and inside it, write split landing, dot, style, dot, grid template columns, equals, 100% 25%. We will keep the width of the right, and make the left cover it. Do the same for the right side, but reverse the width. Also, after clicking on one of the two sides, we do not want the hover effect to work. So, we will create a flag to know if one of the two sides is taking full width. The variable name will be full screen. We will check in on mouse enter event if this flag is not true before making the change. Do the same for the right side. In the click function, make the flag true to prevent the hover effect, and we will make it false when clicking on back button. So let's create back clicking functionality. Get the back left and back right elements. Make them appear when clicking on left or right. Create a function called back, and inside it turn full screen flag to false. The function will work for both left and right buttons, so make both back buttons disappear. Now let's assign the back function to left and right back buttons using onClick event. Now if I click on left and then click on back, it will not work as the click on left function works with back. If I write console.log and write work in it, and then click again on left, open the console, and it prints work, which is the normal. Now if I click back, it prints work again, which means that the function works. This happens because the click event propagates from the back element to its parent and fires the click function of the left element. So, to prevent it, let's pass the click event to the back function and add event.stop propagation function. This will prevent the propagation of the event. Now let's try clicking on back, and it disappears. I did not change the width of columns, as when mouse moves, hover effect works and width changes. But as from its name, on mouse enter works only when entering the element that the event target. We can use on mouse move instead. In this case, width will change, but function will work many times without need of it. So instead, we will go to back function and add split landing, dot, style, dot, grid template columns, equals, 50% 50%. Now it works right. Let's also solve with increasing as I give one 100% and another 25%, which moves out a parent. We want it to stay in its place and 100% side cover it. The right side is only side that moves 25% to right, so we will go to CSS file and give both right and left elements position relative, the left for another thing we will do next. Now go back to JS file and in left click function add right, dot, style, dot, left, equals, -25 VW. To move it to opposite direction. We use VW instead of % to be accurate value. Write same line also in right click function. Remove this change in back function. Let's check, it works. But we want the slow movement of right to be same with width increasing, to remove white space at right. Also we want the 100% element to be at top. Let's first work with second problem. In left click function add to left style z index value 5 or any positive number. Element with biggest number will be at top. Z index works only with positioned elements, so that we add position relative to both left and right elements. Do same for right click function. Remove it in back function. Now for slowing movement, go to CSS file. We want the transition to change the position of the right from 0 to -25 gradually, so we should set the left of the right element with 0 first. Now set the transition with the same value of the split landing transition. Now it works fine. We do not want appearance of two scroll bars, so in split content add overflow hidden property. Now let's display inner content also, so define two variables for left inner and right inner elements. In left click function make left inner dot style dot display equals block, the same for right inner element. Remove it in back function. Now let's give inner some styles. Let's start with the button and give it background color firebrick, color white, border none, border radius 10 pixels, padding 5 pixels 10 pixels. Make gap between each element in the inner content. Also let's make arrows for the list. Select UL, remove the dots. Now we will use pseudo before element with each li. Add content with empty string. Add position relative, as we will need it for position absolute in the next part. With 10 pixels, height 10 pixels, position absolute, add left and bottom borders with 3 pixels solid firebrick. Rotate the element -45 degrees to make it look like an arrow. Let's add left 0 to make the arrow at the start, and change the border width to 2 pixels. Now make the title in the outer element disappear when clicking on one of them. And return when clicking back. Also give it fade effect by going to CSS file and selecting outer H3. Give it transition 0.7 second. For the right part, let's keep the position of the image in the right by add flex direction row reverse in the click right function, and remove it in the back function. Let's add some spaces in the sides by add padding 0 for top and bottom, and 20 pixels for the left and right. In the back function, instead of giving each of all these attributes value null separately, let's make all of them equal each other equal null. Also for the inner part, let's change the text direction to left. So go to CSS file, and in the inner give it text align left property. Now let's make this landing responsive to small screen. For small screen, the splitting should be horizontal, and the content in each part should be vertical. In CSS file, let's add media query with max width 576 pixels. In this media query, any styles I add will be applied only for window size 576 pixels and smaller. So let's select split landing and change grid template columns to none, and add grid template rows 50% 50%. Then select the left element, set grid column to unset, and use grid row instead. Do the same for the right element. If you notice, on mouse enter works when I click and hold on left side. This adds the columns again, so to prevent this, we need to add another condition to the if statement. We will add to the condition of full screen variable not true that also the window dot inner width should be more than 576 pixels. Also in the click function, let's add condition that if window inner width is more than 576 pixels, it will apply the lines of grid template columns and the right, style, left properties. Else for width smaller than 576 pixels, we will replace columns with rows, left with top, and VW with VH. Let's try now. Let's also make the content vertical. Go to CSS file and select both left and right sides. Give them flex direction column property. In the preview example, I give the image 100% width and outer content margin top. Instead, here I will give left side justify content center only. Let's also add a condition to the back function. The condition is that if the window inner width is more than 576, then apply the line of grid template columns. Else use grid template rows instead. Let's also solve right side movement and add top 0 to right side. Now there is no white space at bottom. Let's add changes that we made to left also to right element. In JS file add if window inner width is more than 576 pixels, add lines of grid template columns and left style left properties. Else use rows instead of columns, top instead of left, and VH instead of VW. Also add line of flex direction row reverse to the more than 576 pixels condition. Now if we return to normal screen, open left or right side and click back, then open small screen. We will find a white space at right, and if we check split landing element, we will find that grid template columns that added by click function is still applied, although we set grid template columns to none in media query. The reason is that JS adds styles to element directly, so JS styles have higher priority than CSS styles. Also, if you notice that media query styles have higher priority than normal styles. So to solve this problem, you need only to add exclamation point important to grid template columns in split landing in media query. Now if we try again, there is no white space. If we revert previous steps, and in small screen open left or right side and click back, then return to normal screen, we will find a white space at bottom. This is also because grid template rows that added by click function. To solve this, you can add a new media query with min width instead of max width with the same value, and select split landing with grid template rows none important. But instead of adding a new media query, there are some other changes we can make using JavaScript. So go to JS file and add window dot on resize event. This function works every time the window size changes. As our changes will not work with every resize, let's create a variable that will store the old window width. Let's call it old window width. And on every window resize, pass the window inner width to our variable, and before this, check if window inner width is more than 576 and old window width is less than this number. In this case, the grid template changes from rows to columns, so we will make split landing dot style dot grid template rows equals null. Now if the case is opposite and window inner width is less than 576 and old window width is more than 576, this means that grid template changes from columns to rows. But if we open a side and change the window size without clicking back, the percentage will be 50% for each side, and the inner content of the open side will be displayed, and the right side will have a position. To solve this, we need to check in window resize that if there is a column or row, depending on the window size, that has 100% width. To do that, let's add a condition in the size that grid template rows changes to columns. The rows have the size percent that we want to check. So we will check if split landing dot style dot grid template rows dot split in a space dot includes 100%. Includes method checks a specific value in an array. If the value exists, it returns true else false. And split method splits the string of grid template at the specified value. In this case, it is a space and collects the strings in an array. So now this line separates the string into two percentages and checks if one of them is 100% and returns true if so. In this condition, we will pass the size percentage from rows to columns. As we use the value of grid template rows, the line of grid template rows equals null should be after the condition. Also change right style top to null as the splitting is now vertical. Use left instead. Do the same in the opposite resize, and reverse rows and columns and top and left. If we try now, we will find that our changes are not applied. This is because of a problem in Chrome device toolbar. If I add console.log to print the window inner width and old window width, we will find that window inner width is the full width instead of the width of the mobile window, and if I change the dimensions, it reads it correctly but returns wrong again. So to avoid it, we will change the width of all browser window, and we will find that our conditions work fine. We can add some changes to design to be like that. I will let you try to make it by yourself, and I will make another video for it. So for now, that is all in this video. I hope you find it useful, and you learn something from it. I will upload the code on GitHub, and add the link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.